collective.
Usually when we talk about global supply chains, you picture shipping containers, like massive cranes lifting those corrugated metal boxes in some bustling port.
Right. Everything is barcoded.
Exactly. Barcodes scanned with absolute precision, cargo planes crossing the ocean on these incredibly tight schedules. It's orderly, it's commerce. It is the modern miracle of things moving from a factory floor to a warehouse right to your front door.
And every single step of that journey is tracked and insured and really just optimized for maximum economic efficiency.
Yeah. But then you step into the darker corners of the global economy. And suddenly that shipping container isn't holding consumer electronics or fast fashion. We're looking at a logistical landscape where the commodities being tracked, priced, and traded are, well, human beings.
Or in some of the most harrowing cases we've seen in the sources, parts of human beings.
Yeah, it's heavy. Today, we're going on a deep dive into the intersection of human exploitation, the jurisdictional blind spots that just allow it to happen, and the complex financial systems used to launder the proceeds of these crimes.
It's essentially the absolute definition of a moral collapse, but it's operating right underneath the surface of legitimate global commerce.
Right. And to really grasp the scale of this, we're pulling from a pretty startling stack of sources today. We've got historical documents on Operation Paperclip, global financial crime reports from Advisance and the IMF, international legal protocols, the Panama Papers, and we need to introduce a morally charged phrase to kind of tie this all together, which is human goods.
Yeah, that phrase is critical.
Because what happens when human beings are just stripped of their inherent dignity and converted into purely economic assets? Okay, let's unpack this.
So the term human goods is important to define right away because it's actually not a standard legal term. Like, you won't find it formally codified in a law dictionary.
Right.
It is a critique. It's a way of describing the ultimate commodification of humanity. It's when people are treated as items assigned a price, exchanged through markets, and valued entirely for profit rather than, their dignity or their rights.
It means a person is being viewed not as an autonomous individual, but just as a biological or labor asset.
Exactly. And that framing applies to several distinct abuses. There's the trafficking of persons, where a human is exploited repeatedly over time. Think forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. The value there is in their ongoing output.
But then there's organ removal trafficking, right? Or the broader trade in bodily materials like tissue and blood.
Yes, which functions more like a one-time liquidation of a biological asset. It's deeply unsettling. There is also the illicit transfer of children or adoption abuse. And this is where the context of global conflict becomes this massive catalyst.
Yeah, the sources talk a lot about this. You frequently hear orphans, displaced children, or even harvested organs described clinically as byproducts of war, which is a horrifying term.
It is. Now, that doesn't mean victims are inherently products. The term is a warning. It's a critique about how violence creates an artificial massive supply of vulnerable people for these exploitative markets.
Because conflict just completely obliterates the rule of law infrastructure. You suddenly have massive populations of displaced adults, separated children, injured refugees, and they all lack identity documents. They don't have safe housing or any protection from authorities.
They become invisible to the state.
Exactly, which makes them highly visible to predators.
Precisely. When normal law enforcement, health oversight, and social support systems break down, corrupt actors immediately move in. I mean, a child separated from caregivers in a war zone lacks money or adult protection. Those gaps are immediately exploited by fraudulent recruiters or illicit brokers or armed groups.
Because they view that vulnerability purely as an opportunity for monetization.
Yes, exactly.
To really bring the sheer scale of this commodification into focus for you. There's a historical anecdote from the Operation Paperclip sources that just illustrates the banality of this evil perfectly.
The Strasbourg memo?
Yeah, the memo. So it's 1944. During the liberation of Strasbourg, France, an American scientist named Samuel Godsmith was hunting down Nazi research for Operation Alsos. And in the abandoned apartment of a fleeing Nazi virus expert, Dr. Eugen Hagen, Godsmith finds this memo.
And it wasn't some top-secret battle plan.
No, it was casual administrative correspondence. Hagen was writing to a colleague requesting 100 healthy prisoners for his medical experiments. And he notes, almost as an administrative afterthought, that of the last batch of 100 prisoners sent to him,
that 18 died in transport.
18 died in transport. And he was simply filing a requisition form for replacements. He needed 100 more, between 20 and 40 years old, healthy like soldiers.
The logistical framing is what makes it so chilling.
It's as if they were ordering office supplies, not human beings. Like, oh, a few of the toner cartridges broke in shipping, please send another box.
Right.
That level of sheer commodification really forces us to ask how modern international law draws a hard line against this, because people cross borders for legitimate medical care or legitimate adoptions every single day.
Right, and that boundary is defined by the UN's Palermo Protocol, which establishes this three-part triad for adult trafficking. It requires an act, a means, and a purpose.
And understand the mechanics of that triad is essential for prosecutors. So the act is the recruitment or transportation or harboring of a person.
And the means involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion.
Right, and then the purpose is the actual exploitation. So international law requires all three elements to prevent, legitimate, albeit harsh, labor disputes from being legally conflated with actual human enslavement.
But the protocol shifts the burden of proof dramatically when it comes to children. For a minor, the means element, that force, fraud, or coercion, is entirely stripped from the requirement.
Wow, so it changes the legal battlefield entirely.
Completely. If prosecutors can prove the act of moving or harboring a child and the purpose of exploitation, it is legally trafficking. Full stop.
So a child's apparent agreement or a defense attorney arguing there was no visible physical coercion is just legally irrelevant.
Exactly, because a child cannot consent to their own exploitation.
That makes sense. But even with these clear international protocols, predators rely on jurisdictional blind spots to thrive. They need shadows to hide in. To operate in plain sight, they exploit structural gaps where the law simply cannot reach them.
Jurisdictional voids.
Yeah. Take the 1978 U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Oliphant v. Suquamish Indian Tribe. This is a textbook example from the sources of a jurisdictional void. The ruling actually barred Native American tribes from prosecuting non-natives for crimes committed on tribal lands.
Which structurally created a sanctuary for predators. A criminal could cross into a reservation, commit heinous acts against Native American victims, and effectively be immune from the tribal courts.
And while U.S. federal prosecutors technically had jurisdiction, they often declined to prosecute due to distance or lack of resources or sheer inaction. The predator leverages the friction between those sovereign entities.
It's a structural failure that gets weaponized.
There's another tragic one. The UK had a similarly horrific structural gap, known as the abuse denial loophole, which somehow persisted until 2012.
Right, the collective silence issue?
Yeah. Mechanically, the criminal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt was applied so rigidly to individual actions that it allowed collective silence to defeat prosecution entirely. If a child was fatally abused by their caretakers, the state had to prove exactly which adult delivered the fatal blow.
So, multiple abusive adults living in the same house could literally just point fingers at each other or refuse to speak at all.
Because the state couldn't definitively pin the specific act on a specific silent adult.
And so the entire household avoid prosecution. What's fascinating here is how these physical and legal loopholes run perfectly parallel to financial loopholes.
Oh, that's a great point.
Just as abusers use collective silence and jurisdictional boundaries to hide physical crimes, transnational syndicates use financial loopholes like anonymous offshore accounts and corporate shells to hide the money generated by human goods.
It's the exact same methodology, just applied to capital.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the monetization process. How does the suffering of a displaced person actually turn into usable wealth for a criminal network?
It's all about the chain of profit, because monetization means converting vulnerability into income, and it is rarely just a single transaction.
Right, a displaced adult is monetized through debt bondage or fraudulent recruitment fees, wage theft.
Right.
A separated child is monetized through illegal transfer, fraudulent documentation, sexual abuse.
And an injured or desperate refugee is monetized through illicit organ removal or coerced donation. And that profit is extracted by a long chain of actors. You have the recruiters, the transporters, the document forgers, the corrupt border officials, the brokers.
But a syndicate cannot just walk into a retail bank in London or New York with millions of dollars in human trafficking proceeds. They have to launder the spoils.
They have to park that illicit wealth in the legitimate economy.
And according to the sources, one of the most effective parking spots globally is real estate. Investigations into markets like Dubai and the Panama Papers leak show this massive influx of criminal actors buying up property to conceal illicit revenue.
The influx is so severe in places like London that the National Crime Agency has noted overseas criminals sequestering their assets are actually artificially driving up housing prices.
Oh, wow.
It's warping the local market for everyday citizens, and they do this using shell companies and blank deeds.
This raises a really important question about the enablers. Because criminals aren't drafting complex multinational shell company structures on their own, right?
No, not at all. They rely heavily on a highly stratified market of third-party professionals. We're talking lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, corporate service providers. These professionals are the gatekeepers to the legitimate financial system.
So I have to push back a little here based on what we're reading. Are we supposed to believe these elite financial professionals are just unwitting dupes? Or is this, a calculated, willful blindness? Because if you set up an offshore corporate vehicle whose sole mathematical purpose is to obscure the beneficial owner, the actual human being pulling the strings, isn't the financial system functioning exactly as it was designed to?
That is a profound tension, and it's a debate that's raging right now. The system is designed to offer privacy, and the enablers will forcefully argue there are legitimate legal reasons for that.
Like what?
Well, think of a public figure avoiding harassment, or a corporation preparing for a quiet merger without triggering market panic, or even a business leader protecting their family from kidnapping risks in certain countries. They might legally use hidden ownership.
Okay, I get that.
And they often root this argument in the fundamental right to privacy under the European Convention on Human Rights.
But the exact same mechanism that protects a celebrity's home address shields a human trafficking syndicate's bank account. When legitimate privacy crosses the line into impenetrable secrecy, it exclusively benefits criminal actors. And let's be real, maintaining hidden ownership is highly profitable for these enablers, which is why there is massive institutional resistance to transparency laws.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, law enforcement can't just rely on subpoenaing shell companies. Investigators have to follow the actual settlement trail, and often that means leaving the traditional banking system entirely and looking at informal value transfer systems.
Like Hawala.
Yes, Hawala networks.
These are fascinating because the money doesn't physically cross borders. In a typical transfer, a sender gives cash to a broker in country A. That broker simply instructs a counterpart broker in country B to pay the recipient out of their own local funds.
Right.
It's basically like a group of friends keeping a running bar tab across different countries. But the critical part for investigators isn't that initial payment, right? It's how those brokers eventually settle their debts with each other.
Exactly. Because instead of wiring cash internationally to settle up, one friend just buys a shipment of electronics for the other. It's called trade-based money laundering, or TBML.
So a broker in country A buys a massive shipment of electronics, over-invoices the value, and ships it to the broker in country B.
The physical goods settle the financial debt. The original dirty money never crossed a border. And to a traditional bank auditor, the initial cash drop and the final electronics shipment look completely unrelated.
So to crack that, financial intelligence units have to rely on link analysis software to map out these circular trades. They're scanning massive data sets for shared phone numbers, overlapping travel records, and trade price anomalies.
Right, like a shipping manifest claiming a single plastic bucket is worth $500.
Yeah, exactly. And they have to share this suspicious transaction data globally through networks like the Egmont Group. But, looking to the technological frontier, the financial battlefield is shifting rapidly. We're moving towards central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, stable coins, and global interoperability projects like Enbridge.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because theoretically, blockchain technology and distributed ledgers make every single payment leg perfectly visible. The ledger is immutable. So doesn't a digital transparent currency instantly solve the tracking problem for law enforcement?
It's a double-edged sword, primarily because of the garbage in, garbage out problem.
Okay, explain that.
Yes, a distributed ledger creates a permanent, auditable transaction history, but an immutable ledger only records what it is instructed to record. If a criminal network uploads a falsified invoice for phantom goods to settle a Hawala debt,
the blockchain just permanently records a lie.
Exactly. It makes the false record highly durable. It doesn't magically verify the real-world truth of the transaction.
Wow. And then there's the gap created by unhosted wallets, the Financial Action Task Force, the global money laundering watchdog, implemented what's called the travel rule.
A very important piece of regulation.
Yeah, it mandates that originator and beneficiary data must travel with digital asset transfers, just like traditional wire transfers. But that rule fundamentally breaks down when the transfer leaves a regulated exchange and goes to an unhosted wallet.
Right, like a piece of hardware or software where the user directly controls the private cryptographic keys. There is no institution to subpoena. Verifying the real-world identity of the person holding that USB drive is incredibly difficult.
Which proves that technology alone cannot instantly solve the human element of deception. And that brings us to, honestly, the most uncomfortable dilemma of this entire landscape.
The societal risks.
Yeah, the very tools being developed to stop human trafficking and illicit finance AI transaction monitoring, instant payment tracing, programmable money, they bring their own massive, systemic, societal risks.
Absolutely. Take programmable money through a retail CBDC. Theoretically, it sounds highly efficient. A government could automate compliance, instantly blocking payments to sanctioned entities, or programming funds to only release when specific supply chain milestones are verified.
But the danger of a highly centralized retail CBDC is that it could give a government granular, real-time control over the lawful spending of its citizens.
We are talking about the architecture for unrestricted state monitoring.
Yeah.
Furthermore, if you deploy AI models to monitor these billions of instant transactions and flag suspicious behavior, you run headfirst into severe algorithmic bias. The sources point out that AI models trained on historical financial crime data can disproportionately flag innocent minorities, migrants, or cash-intensive small businesses.
Just freezing them entirely out of the global financial system without any due process.
Right.
So what does this all mean? In our desperate rush to build a flawless financial panopticon to catch traffickers and money launderers, we risk building an unrestricted state surveillance machine that traps everyone else. We risk destroying the very autonomy we are trying to protect.
That is the central tension of modern policy. The safest path forward isn't total frictionless surveillance.
Okay, so what is it?
It requires interoperable data getting the US, Europe, and Asia to agree on common legal standards for accountable sharing across borders. It requires lifting the veil on corporate shell companies to verify ownership for high-risk businesses. And technologically, we have to leverage innovations like zero-knowledge proofs.
Oh, zero-knowledge proofs. For those unfamiliar, a zero-knowledge proof is this brilliant cryptographic method. It basically allows one party to mathematically prove to a network that a statement is true without revealing the underlying private data. So you could prove to a blockchain that your transaction is compliant with international sanctions, or that you have sufficient funds, without exposing your entire financial history or your real-world identity to a public ledger. It verifies the rule was followed without spilling your secrets.
It is the ultimate middle ground between privacy and compliance. But crucially, even with advanced cryptography, we cannot eliminate accountable human review. We cannot allow an AI model or an automated smart contract to make final, binding legal judgments about freezing a citizen's assets. Due process requires human oversight.
It really does. We've covered some incredibly intense ground today, from the horrifying historical reality of Operation Paperclip, where human beings were systematically treated as disposable laboratory assets, to the jurisdictional blind spots like tribal land legal voids and the UK's abuse denial loophole that shield predators from consequence.
And we followed the mechanics of how vulnerability is monetized into profit.
Right. Laundering it through corporate shell companies into London real estate, transferring it across borders through ancient trade-based systems like Hawala and modern unhosted crypto wallets.
It perfectly illustrates how the infrastructure designed for legitimate global commerce is the exact same infrastructure being weaponized by illicit networks.
Which is why this deeply matters to you listening right now. The real estate market in your city, the corporate structures you interact with daily, the digital money evolving in your smartphone wallet. These are the active battlegrounds where this invisible war against the commodification of human life is being fought.
It's all connected.
It is. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. Let's say technologies like central bank digital currencies and zero-knowledge proofs eventually succeed. Let's say governments completely eliminate financial anonymity globally, and every single digital cent is perfectly tracked, mapped, and audited. Will transnational criminals simply abandon the digital grid altogether?
Will they revert to ancient systems of pure physical barter, cash smuggling, and direct physical control to run their empires?
Exactly. And if stopping the commodification of human goods ultimately requires surrendering all of our financial privacy. Who is really holding the keys to our freedom? Think back to those shipping containers we started with. The containers might get smarter, the tracking algorithms might get perfect, but if the cargo inside is still suffering, have we actually solved the problem or just built a better scanner? Until next time.